Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. May I ask that you have a seat, please? Hello, Glenn. Hi, welcome. I'd like to begin our Central Business District Forum, please. Please have a seat. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for attending this, now our 9th in the series of Central Business District Forums. Very often in the past, those individual forums, without even intending that to be the case, were dominated by the topic of parking. Well, tonight we are intentionally about parking, and that will be the subject to which we will turn shortly. I would, however, like to set the stage by some quotes, if you will bear with me. The committee was charged first, and by the way, I'm Albert Pucciarelli, Deputy Mayor of the Village of Ridgewood. The committee was charged first with determining whether there exists a parking problem in Ridgewood's Central Business District. The committee believes that the evidence is conclusive. Taking the most careful and unbiased survey possible, there was a parking problem in Ridgewood CBD according to the most objective and widely recognized standard we could find. The committee has unanimously agreed on this, as well as on the fact that the area directly east of Erie Railroad tracks has reached crisis proportions. The CBD contributes greatly as an employer. The stake that Ridgewood has in the continued prosperity of the CBD is a great one. The committee unanimously felt that construction of a parking facility was essential, that the major need in the area of the CBD is just east of the Erie Railroad tracks. The committee went on to explore and then recommended a 520-space facility. This is, of course, if you don't recognize it, the report of the Special Advisory Committee on Parking, submitted to Mayor Robert Schell when I was 17 years old in April 1968. We hadn't even landed on the moon yet. And so tonight, on the eve of a referendum vote on that same topic, we are convened to consider a facility. A parking deck on Broad and Hudson Streets has been rendered by architects before us as a garage, as one possibility of what might be built there. Final specs for the building will require further discussions in several forums if we can clear the threshold decision to proceed. And I think it is about time, in my personal view, that we do that. I'd like to call upon some of the comments that our mayor made in a recent email. He said that parking revenue, not taxes, would pay for this deck. There would be no charge for parking on Sundays. There have been no decisions taken with respect to meter times or rates. The appearance of the proposed parking deck has not been decided. Tuesday's referendum question is only asking if residents support financing and building a garage on the Hudson Street lot. So, against that background, as always in these Central Business District forums, I invite you to come forward to this open mic between now and 8 p.m. And then at 8 p.m., we will turn to some of the professionals that are here, and they can tell us more about the garage. And if you have raised questions about the garage, they will try to respond to them. This session, this open mic, is dedicated to the Central Business District. However, it does not have to be about the garage exclusively. You can come up and talk about the planters, traffic flow, Park Mobile, how it's working, or any other subject relating to the CBD. And that's the way we've proceeded in the past, and some good ideas have been generated as a result of that. So, does anyone want to go first? I think, Jim, you're first on the list, so come on up. I'll grab the list and read off the names of the speakers in sequence. Thank you, Jim.
I'm Jim Griffith. I live on 159 South Irving Street. I moved into town 53 years ago. It's been fun. It's been a good ride. I'm happy to be here, and I have no intention to move. I don't care who says what, or what they try to do, or how stupid they can get, or how rude or crude they can try and get. I'm not leaving. So let that go down in the books. About the parking problem, Michael Seaton told me as a reporter, he did some real background checking on the parking problem. And the parking problem was first listed in the newspaper in Ridgewood in 1928. That's 6 years before I was born. 6 years before I was born, you had a parking problem. Now you've been very fortunate to go ahead and document this a number of times. And each time you documented it, you spent a big chunk of taxpayers' money. So we have a record. And I think the low number is 600 and the high number is about 1,500, but it's 1,200 at the average that you needed back then. So you can imagine, come on, time goes by, you need even more. So all of a sudden, and what I am so proud of is this administration, whenever there's a controversial issue, you wonder if you've done your homework. Did I do it right? Did I make sure everybody knew what was going on? Did I give them all the facts? Maybe I gave them too many facts. But we've done it right. Nobody can fault us on this issue on how it was put in front of the public. It was done inside out and outside in. And we had it authenticated financially by several different groups. One of them, a group of taxpayers who were brought in as volunteers. And they came in and they confirmed the validity, the actual validity of our financial approach and how beneficial it was going to be. And let's just take another odd fact. If you're finally, after 60 or 70 years, you're finally going to correct a problem and you're going to have to invest some money, tell me about the interest rates right now. It's like you're going Christmas shopping and you're getting a present because the interest rates are so low right now, all right? It shouldn't be a problem of the taxpayer, but it's a marvelous time. I'm so proud of this administration having the guts and the courage to put the facts on the table so that those people who were concerned about the issue could come out and see them. Now, if you're not concerned and you have extra time on your hand, you can come up with things like this. And it was very disturbing to get this, especially when I looked to the back to see who sent it to me. And I realized that the person who sent it to me didn't have the courage to put his name on it. And also, if you didn't read the fine print, you remember what they always say about the fine print? You gotta double check the fine print. Well, there's some fine print on this. And it says, artist rendering, not to exact scale. Where's the big picture? No big picture. You got it hiding. You take a look at this picture here, and the way it's out of adjustment with reality, and you put it up against this. This is lying. This is lying. You can put that little fine print there, but that's not telling the truth. That's a shame. So I think we ought to really applaud our current board for sticking to the fight and not letting anybody rattle their tracks. You did it right, you did it on time, and if you want, you can turn around and see all the pictures we have in here. A lot of pictures. You got to remember that the problem was first defined over in that corner. So all these people did not take the action that the current board is taking. So I compliment them, and thank you for listening to me.
Tony Damiano. One of the members of the committee that wrote that report in 1968 was Mrs. Margaret Raukemer, and there's other distinguished members of the committee. And the committee report is really worth reading, and you could just update it. It sounds so much like today.
Thank you. And thanks, Jim Griffith. This is a tough act to follow. Tony Damiano, I am a Ridgewood resident. I've had a retail store in town called Mango Jam for 15 years. President of the Ridgewood Guild, former president of the Ridgewood Chamber of Commerce. I've told this story for 15 years, but my background is store design and visual merchandising. I worked for almost 30 years for 5 major retail companies, including the Pottery Barn, Conrad's Habitat. I opened stores throughout the country in 38 states and Puerto Rico, and we would go into neighborhoods, many neighborhoods comparable to Ridgewood. And there were 2 factors that we always looked at. One was parking, and second was the tenant mix. I'm going to talk about the tenant mix first. Our tenant mix has been off balance for about 10 years now. Reason is, there are many factors, one of which is parking. People will not come into Ridgewood. They boycott Ridgewood. I am very happy that I have a lot of Ridgewood residents shop me, and I treasure them. But we small business owners cannot make a go of it by just Ridgewood alone. And I'm sorry to say many Ridgewood residents do not shop the downtown, which, by the way, is the heartbeat of our village. It's one of the #1 reasons to move into town, because we had such a dynamic downtown, which is now floundering and has been floundering. We went through, when the town was booming, what I call our bank era. We actually peaked at 22 banks in town. Some banks had 2 and 3 branches in town. And when I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, that was my battle, to see if we could pass an ordinance, et cetera, to stop them from coming in. But lo and behold, they came, they ate up all of our large retail spaces, and those spaces, some of them are still vacant today. Some of them have been occupied, but some are still vacant. And the tenant mix has dwindled. We are now what I call in our restaurant era, and God bless the restaurants, but God help them also, because every time another restaurant opens, a piece of the pie is taken. And the restaurants own the evening, there is no question about it. And the retail's time of business is during the day. I have the great luxury and fortune to be able to walk to work in the morning, and I get there early. I'm an early riser. I'm on North Broad Street, and I'll walk to work at 9, 9:15 in the morning. I have 94 parking spaces on North Broad Street. At 9:15, guess how many parking spaces there are? Hardly any, and the retailers don't open till 10 o'clock. Why is that? I can tell you again, I'm going back to when I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, and we did a comprehensive parking study in town. We don't supply enough employee parking. It's all employees on the streets. And I know there's a lot going on in Ridgewood right now, but I can tell you a parking garage is not going to impact our school system, and it is not going to impact traffic. It will only help it. And it'll help it because you won't have to circle 5 and 6 and 7 times before you find a parking space. Our parking dilemma is twofold. Number one, we don't have parking, and number two, when you find parking, it was only a 2-hour limit. We have taken a small step to rectify that. I was a great advocate of raising the meters to 3 hours, and we did. After many conversations and presentations, Village Council raised the meters to 3 hours, which has helped tremendously, but that still is only a baby step in solving the problem. It's kind of an embarrassment to say that we encourage shopping and dining. And anyone who loves the town, truly loves the downtown, and uses the downtown should vote yes tomorrow. This is not going to impact the village the way you think it is. We will always remain a village. We have a finite amount of space here. What it'll do is organize the parking situation, and hopefully we will win back some of our customers who are long gone. Like I said, we cannot survive on just Ridgewood residents alone. You may say, yes, I have a retail store, I'm looking for my own interests. Partly true, but I'm on my way out. I'm here 15 years, you know, I'm heading towards retirement. But God help all these young people, or just people in general, who think they can make a go of a mom and pop store today. They don't know what the town is like until those doors are open. You cannot live on holiday season alone when people are desperate to shop. We need a constant flow year-round, and people are tired of not being able to find parking. So I urge you all to vote yes tomorrow and help save our downtown. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Rurik Halaby. We have 3 more speakers, including Mr. Halaby, and then we'll turn it over to our professionals.
Thanks. I'll be very, very brief. What I wanted to do was to thank the mayor, the deputy mayor, and Councilwoman Hawk for the amazing amount of time, energy, toil, sweat, and tears they have put into it. I mean, my God, it is such an impressive effort that you've put in, and I really cannot thank you enough. This is one thank you. The second thank you is to Roberta and her team for bringing in an absolutely first-class organization. And when people are always kicking the can down the road by saying, let's have another study, well, this is the mother of all studies. I mean, I've never seen anything that's as thorough and as thoughtful as what these guys have gone through. My third thank you is to a person who's not here, and that's Michael Seedon, because Michael actually had the guts to vote against his base by voting for the bond that allowed the study to be done. I mean, some people say, let's have a study, which is going to cost nothing, which means you buy yourself a nice crystal ball and come up with any number that you want to. So anyway, so Mike, whoever you are, thank you for having the courage for doing that. But seriously, where's the mayor? Mayor, thank you very, very much. Roberta, Gwen, and Albert, and whatever happens tomorrow happens. It's something we need, and I have a feeling it will pass. Thank you very much.
Speaking about whatever happens tomorrow, our next speaker has an interest in that outcome. Paul Vegianos.
Thanks, Albert. I'm Paul Vagianos. I live here in town. I own It's Greek to Me restaurant for the last 19 years, and I'm the president of the Chamber of Commerce. And I don't want to talk about parking. I want to talk about taxes, because we have a parking problem, but our bigger problem is property taxes. And I think that this parking deck can actually help us with our property tax problem. As many people know, in Paramus, the taxes are reasonably low. And they're low because they have very good ratables. Ratables are the malls, the stores. And because those stores are so busy, the rents are very high. And when the rents are high, the appraised value of the property is very high. And when the appraised value of the property is high, the taxes on those properties are high. And that shifts the tax burden from the residents to the commercial section of town. Here in Ridgewood, we have the opposite situation. And I was here when business was very good and property taxes were very high in the central business district. But in 2008, 2009, many property owners in town had their taxes reduced by as much as 40% over a 2 or 3 year cycle. And the reason is that business plummeted in 2008, 2009. And despite what anyone will tell you, it has never fully recovered. Since business is down, when stores go out of business and they get rented again, the rents have gone down dramatically. They've gone down about 40%. So when rents are down, the appraised value of the building is down, property taxes are down. And what happens is that tax burden gets shifted to the resident taxpayers. I know it. It happened on my house. It happened on yours. If we build this parking deck, that creates greater capacity for the stores to do more business. Because right now, You can only do as much business in a store as you have parking capacity for. The analogy I always like to give is farmer and water. If you give a farmer a little bit of water, he can grow a few crops. You give him abundant water, he can feed the world. Same thing with parking and a commercial business district. If there's just a little bit of parking, they can only do a little bit of business because people can't get to town. You all know it because it's all happened to you. You've said, you know what, I'm not going to go there. It's too hard. I'm going to go to Wyckoff or Paramus or someplace else because I can get a parking space. It's just too much work. Everybody does that. We're all just naturally human. We're looking for an easier way. When that happens, we do less business in town. If we create greater parking capacity, though, people will come back to town. There will be more business. When there's more business, rents will go up. And by the way, it's a fallacy that rents are high in Ridgewood right now, in the Central Business District. They're actually incredibly low. But if we can create more business by getting more parking, rents will go up. When the rents go up, it will shift some of that tax burden from the residents to the Central Business District, where it should be. And so if you don't use the Central Business District yourself, if you don't shop there, if you don't dine there, and you don't really care about it for yourself, that's fine. Eat where you want, shop where you want. But if you're a taxpayer in this town, you should want this parking deck more than anything else, because that's the one thing that can help you with your property taxes on your home. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And our final speaker is Tom Hillman.
I've been around this town, well, my family's been around this town 105 years. We've been doing business in this town. I've been teased on the issue of parking. I've always heard about it. Probably a lot of people don't know that my family once owned the Walnut Street parking lot. And we were promised during the eminent domain proceedings that took it that we were going to get a parking garage. That was in 1972. I was in college. As you can see, I've graduated. And we've been promised, several times, and I know of at least 2 other times on that site, and it fell through for 1 vote. At this point, we could have had a parking garage that was paid for, and we would have had many years of the use of that parking garage. But it's always too big. It's always too costly. The cost, I mean, remember the first parking garage that was put down was $6,000 a spot. I'm not sure of the actual cost now, but that was petty cash at this time. But we've had every survey tell us in that time, yes, you need that. You've had deficiencies. You have had loss of parking through, we had all sorts of, we had gas stations. Each gas station would have a little sideline of parking cars. We don't have that anymore. We had a certain realtor that we lost 70 parking spots because they were too close to the crosswalks. So we've actually lost parking in this town. And so even if we get this, we're just going to get back to where we were. And when I saw that flyer, I was just disgusted. First of all, I was disgusted, as was already said, that someone wouldn't even put their name on it. I mean, people have said, well, did you read the blog? Well, no, I don't read the blog because everybody is anonymous. And they can say anything they want. They can lie. They can stretch the fact. And when I saw that, and I saw the photograph of there's a building there that's not even there. It's been moved from on the other side. It's been made smaller. And the fact that it says that we what happens if we can't fill it with commuters? Well, I may be wrong, but didn't we just throw about 130 or so commuters out because they weren't village commuters? I mean, come on, if the train's coming through, we're going to have commuters. And if we have to fill them with out-of-towners to make it fill, that's one thing. But I think we have employees and we have in-town, we have a lot of more in-town commuters that would love to be able to park. And I just see this as such a non-brainer that, and I've been seeing it for 43 years. And I'm trying to look forward and saying that, yes, we're going to have this, but, you know, it's in hindsight, you know, we've got to push for it, and we've got to see that Ridgewood's got to move forward. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sam. For the benefit of anyone who is watching on TV, they can't see the audience. I can, and there's a lot of people here who should be recognized. We have members of the Financial Advisory Committee, Nancy Johansson, chair. There's Janet Willits, member, and I saw another, Charles DeMarco is here. We have Tess Giuliani from the Historic Preservation Commission, our fire chief. Jim Van Gore is here, Councilwoman Hauk. I see our mayor is here, and of course Roberta Sonnenfeld, our village manager, Mr. Rooney, our CFO, and let me see, did I miss anyone? And Bob Roach, of course, from, you're on the Financial Advisory, I'm sorry, you're the newest member of the Financial Advisory Committee. Thank you, Bob. So, anyway, I thank, and many of our citizens here, so thank you very much. Oh, and I'm sorry, there's Margie Downs from the Ridgewood Arts Council. When you walked into the building this evening, I hope you noticed the artwork throughout the building, and there is more to come. We'll be having a museum-type opening here on January 30th, so I did mention that. Anyway, well, thank you again, and at this point, what we'll do for the next hour is roughly between 8, that's 8 o'clock, not 9 o'clock, between 8 and 8:30, we'll hear from Desmond Design Associates, who put forward a rendering for our consideration and other plans that go with it. And we'll hear also on the financial side from Mr. Rooney, our Chief Financial Officer, joined by members of the Financial Advisory Committee and by Roberta, of course, our village manager. So why don't I invite members of Desmond to go first, and then for the remaining time from roughly 8:30 until 9 o'clock, we'll invite you to come forward as we did at the last forum. That seemed to work very well, where you could come forward and then ask questions of either group, and you'll have the opportunity to sort of peel the onion back by these in-person meetings with the design people and the financial people. So over to you, Tim. Would you introduce yourself and your team?
Thank you, Councilman. My name is Tim Tracy. I'm from Desmond, and we are one of the architects and engineers working on behalf of the village to bring the project forward and give you a little bit of an update to the status, where we're at in the design and some of the features that we've explored and are incorporating at this point in time. With me is Ken Shear with SNL Architects. Ken will also give a brief discussion in terms of the aesthetics and some of the ideas that we've been working on, which helped us to sort of set the foundation, if you will, excuse my pun, for the project, as well as forecast some of the construction costs based on the level of design today. When we were engaged, the village had a goal of adding 300 additional parking spaces to the Hudson Street lot. The Hudson Street lot's at the northeast corner of South Broad Street and Hudson Street. It's currently a surface parking lot. It has about 75 surface parking spaces under its existing configuration, and it's about 100% paved. The lot is roughly 100 feet in the north-south direction by 300 feet in the east-west direction, running from South Broad all the way up to our adjoining property. So in this diagram, the lot actually goes all the way to our neighbor to the east. So we looked at various options in terms of could we achieve 300 additional net gain parking spaces on the site. And the site has some constraints in terms of its geometry. in that the 100 feet really provides some concern in terms of parking geometry to get the additional spaces that the village is trying to achieve. We did analysis, we did some concepts, we did some diagrams, and by staying within the footprint proper of the site, we were going to achieve roughly a 300 space parking facility or a net gain of just about 200 spaces, maybe a little bit more. We then explored options in terms of looking at the village's infrastructure to see if we could trade some of the existing infrastructure, flip it back into the development, into the garage opportunity, to see what benefits that would provide. And what the proposal is suggesting, at least where we're at today, is to maintain the footprint of the parking facility on the first couple of levels, and then as we climb up and get adequate clearances above both the sidewalk and the cartway of Hudson Street, to look at a cantilevered design that would basically extend over the existing sidewalk and encroach slightly into the Hudson Street right-of-way. In order to achieve that, the suggestion would be that we remove the on-street parking spaces that are currently on Hudson Street. So that gave us the 20 feet that we needed in order to facilitate a more efficient design. The 100 feet really only allowed us to have 3 rows of parking and 2 circulation aisles. So 1 circulation aisle didn't have the benefit of 2 rows of parking in a very traditional sense. In order to, again, maximize the efficiency, therefore providing the best opportunity for the project to be self-funded or funded through parking revenues, we looked at rearranging the parking. Most of you are familiar, the parking are very short aisles that run in the north-south direction. Some of those aisles actually are dead end. You can't go from one aisle to the next. It's a very inefficient design in terms of parking design. Therefore, by going in the east-west direction, in the long direction, it really enabled us to have a much more efficient design. So the suggestion would be that we reduce the cartway of Hudson Street to 18 feet, working with the village officials, police department, the fire department, building department, and the village engineer. We've evaluated to determine if 18 feet would be adequate. And I think the conclusion that we've all reached, that 18 feet would certainly be adequate with the removal of the on-street parking spaces. So at the sacrifice of roughly 20 spaces on Hudson Street, we are maintaining 3, maybe 4 spaces at the corner of Prospect to, again, service that existing building, but the balance would be removed. So if we remove 20, it gave us the opportunity to increase the parking expansion by almost 100 spaces. So it seemed like, just from a purely parking count, it seemed like at least an idea worth investigating. And then further to that, we looked at the geometry and the aesthetics and some of the engineering aspects. So this is the site plan. One thing that we felt very strong about, even early on when we were being considered for the engagement, was to maintain a proper setback from our neighbor to the west, to allow and let the village preserve an access easement that it has through this property to our neighbor to the north. There's an existing surface parking lot that services, and it's owned by buildings that front on East Ridgewood Avenue. They do have an access easement, so this property does have a requirement of providing access for those parking spaces as well as service and delivery. Again, we felt taking that outside the footprint provided a greater opportunity. It's a good neighbor situation. And the byproduct of that, if you will, gives us the opportunity to have light and air on 4 sides of the structure. If we were to extend it closer to our neighbor, it would require firewalls, which have no openings. So by this design and maintaining that setback, we'll have openness on 4 sides, on Broad Street, Hudson Street, on the east side, as well as on the north side. So it's inherently beneficial to keep that setback between the 2 buildings. So this site plan shows also a reconfiguration of Hudson Street. as we've gone through the analysis and started to look at how people will try and access the deck and then egress the village after they've either used the train station or visited the shops downtowns or the restaurants or just came in as general visitors, it seemed like a logical sequence for people looking for parking, searching for parking. Where generally, we find that East Ridgewood Avenue tends to be a beacon to come into town, to come to the downtown. People will travel westbound on East Ridgewood. Some will peel off to the north side parking lots in the event that the north side parking lots are full, which seems to be sort of commonplace in town. They then would migrate further to the south and then find themselves on South Broad Street. So if they would then be able to visually see the parking facility, but based on the current one-way traffic flows on the surrounding streets, they wouldn't be able to access it from Hudson Street. So we looked at switching the direction. The preliminary traffic studies have been completed, and it actually improves the level of service at both the intersections of Hudson Street and South Broad and Hudson and Prospect. With that, though, we felt it was important to designate a dedicated left turn lane as you're traveling southbound on Broad Street, so you wouldn't have unnecessary queues of traffic trying to make the left onto Hudson. And again, that will result in the elimination of some of the on-street parking on Hudson Street, which under today only exists on the west side. Under this diagram, there's a suggestion that we would maintain some of that on-street parking. As we've gotten further into the discussions, it probably would suggest that most, if not all, of the parking on South Broad Street would be eliminated. We're still evaluating that. So under this scenario, Hudson Street would be reversed from one-way westbound to one-way eastbound. We'll continue to do the traffic studies again to formalize that, but at least that's the intent. As you can see with this next diagram, okay. So this exhibit shows all the floor plans within the facility, and sort of as we migrate upwards into the garage, how we begin to take advantage of using the area over the sidewalk and less than 2 feet of Hudson Street as we move upwards in the facility. So the grade level plan basically stays within the confines of the existing surface lot. So the sidewalk, as you experience it today, really in its relationship to the parking lot, stays the same under this design. Second level, again, the footprint of the garage, and you can see we have 1, 2, 3 rows of parking and 2 circulation aisles, so that southbound parking bay doesn't have the opportunity to have another row of parking because of the limitation of the 100-foot geometry. So once we get sufficiently above the sidewalk and the cartway, we now extend over the sidewalk and cantilever less than 2 feet into the street to have the opportunity to get that 4th row of parking. So it really goes to achieve the village's objection of 300 parking spaces net gained, as well as the efficiency. So the square foot per space really begins to become manageable in terms of relating that to cost per car, or cost per parking space. And that is maintained. This diagram shows you a section through the garage. So if you were walking from Prospect towards Broad Street on Hudson Street, this is the configuration of the garage sort of at the edge of Hudson Street. So this line really represents where the existing edge of the parking lot currently exists. As we get up to the 3rd level of parking, we introduce the arcade, which is basically a covered sidewalk, and we think it's a really unique design feature. Gives us a lot of opportunity to introduce some real different architecture, as well as we think a real unique opportunity for the village. And then as I said, there's less than a 2-foot cantilever from the proposed curb line of Hudson Street. And this projection is about 19 feet above the pavement. So there's no restrictions in terms of emergency vehicles, service vehicles. We're sufficiently high enough. We're probably, at the end of the day, will be higher than some of the other restraints that you have in town, namely the train trestles. So that, in a nutshell, I think, talks about the sort of the nuts and bolts of the garage. And these are some images of the model that begin to sort of explain what happens in the arcade. And again, we think it's a real interesting design feature, potentially become a real civic space. We started to understand how vehicles exit the facility to make sure there's enough visibility and sight lines for the interaction of cars exiting the garage as they approach the sidewalk. As you can see, that we've opened up the structure to give the greatest opportunity for sight lines. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Ken, and he'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing in terms of the architecture. But I guess just a couple other points I'd like to just sort of touch on. As we've been going through the process, we have been doing all of the necessary engineering analyses. So we've done, to date, we've completed the land survey, and why that's important, not only to define and confirm the dimensions of the site, but we did a full survey of the utilities to understand what utilities might be on the site in terms of impact, relocation, and more importantly, how does it affect the budget. All the surveys have now been completed, and there's only 3 utilities that need to be relocated as part of this project. There's a small electrical feed, there's a fiber optic cable line that crosses the site, and then there's a water line in Hudson Street. So that's been good news. Last week, we also completed the preliminary soil borings for the site. And again, good news came back that the building can be founded on shallow spread footings. There's no need for deep foundations, piles. So that, again, allows us to have much better confidence in terms of the budget and the costs of the project as we move forward. And there's a number of environmental ideas that we've been working with the committee to make the project a green parking facility. So we've got charging stations planned, bike parking, preferential parking for alternate vehicles, high efficiency lighting and electrical systems. We're looking at introducing management ideas as well as recycled construction materials. So at the end of the day, we're hopeful that the building would be designated as a green parking facility, which is a certification process. So we're working to go through all of those checks and balances as well.
Before we turn it over to Ken Shear, who is the architect, I see that there are questions, but if you would bear with us, the format we'd like to continue with is to hear from the architects, then hear from the financial side, and then we'll have an open forum at that point where you can come up and ask them the questions directly. It seemed to work very well when we did that last Wednesday, so we'll proceed on that basis for now. Also want to mention that we've had 2 other members of the Financial Advisory Committee here. Nancy Haig is here. Rich Cundiff is here, and I was remiss in not mentioning Janet Fricke. Janet has been so instrumental in helping with the existing parking to make it more efficient. I know that she's been an enormous help to Roberta and to the entire council, and she also has been very helpful in bringing this process to where it is. And we're over to Ken Shear, architect.
Thank you all for coming. I am a village resident as well. My wife and I moved here in 1985, and I'm familiar with a lot of the architecture in the building, in the village, because I've had the luxury of being able to design some of it. Desmond had asked me to help them to work with this, and we've worked very much in tandem in coming up with a design. And that design has been refined after meeting with Historic Preservation Commission, the Parking Committee, the Mayor and Council, as well as the planning board. And the public wants, and this is the second time, and we're continuing to accept any feedback that you might have so that we can come up with the best possible design. Our job basically was to be tasked with not only coordinating with Desmond in terms of the design on the structure and the green architecture, but primarily the aesthetic, the skin that goes on the building. And so we were very happy to have had input also on the concept of the covered sidewalk, because it's an opportunity to create something different that's not just a plain parking garage, a stagnant structure. It has the opportunity to really infuse some architectural design into the building and make it unique and make it Ridgewood's own. The other thing that we took into account was throughout the village, there are a number of prominent buildings that have very formalized corner elements, and we tried to introduce that into this building as well. And you can see that here on the lower rendering. What's nice about this building, I think, is that we have that element that is really our first two levels of parking. The first level of parking, obviously on grade. The second level of parking is behind these arch structures. The third level of parking is this second band of windows. The fourth level of parking, of course, the top level of windows, and when I say windows, they're not windows, they give the appearance of windows. They're merely openings to allow for fresh air. And the fifth level of parking is actually on the roof, uncovered. So you have 4 levels of covered parking and 1 uncovered on the roof. We worked with Desmond to locate the ramping system on the north side of the building, away from the property lines, away from the street lines, so that gave us the ability to create level facades. So it looks like a building and not like a parking garage where you would see these ramped fenestrations. All of these are open, all down here is all open. This is the tower element is a lobby space. It contains a means of egress stair, and it also contains an elevator. And back in this area, we also have a secondary stair, which is required by code. We've worked with Desmond to keep it as open as we possibly can, again, for natural light and ventilation, but also for safety. And when you're in the garage, it's going to be well lit. We're going to use LED lighting, which is very high efficient in terms of electrical usage, but it also lasts very long. So the lifetime before you would have to change out fixture light bulbs is quite a bit longer than any other type of lighting. So it becomes much more cost effective from an operation and maintenance point of view. But the lobbies are all glass. The elevator is glass. So if you're in the elevator, you'll be able to see people on the outside. They'll be able to see you. It just enhances a feeling of safety, because parking lots are, or used to be, dark, dismal places where you might not feel as safe as personally as you might feel if you were somewhere else. So the new parking garage design takes that into account, and we have it open and airy. We have increased our heights to provide for that as well, and you can begin to see that in this section, the way that we have it. We have our first level is the floor to floor is 12 feet high. Then we have a smaller level, which is 10'6", and then we have 12'6" and 12'6", and then of course the roof. From the first level, the grade level, to the peak of the parapet, we're talking about 51 foot 2 inches. And that may change a little bit as we get into more details, but it's about that high. And to the deck itself is 47 foot 6 at this point. I think that's it. The only other thing I wanted to mention was that Tim had talked about changing the direction of Hudson Street, and Passaic Street goes one way the other direction. That would also change, so that we would have circulation running the proper way. The other thing that we wanted to do on, again, to have the architecture, we wanted to bring down the scale of the building by introducing different materials and different treatment of materials and bring it to a human scale. And that's what these renderings were attempting to show, that design sensitivity. And so we have the arches that go along Hudson Street, as you can see, but we have the transverse arches that feed back in, and then we have these lights that hang. So this creates a very nice covered walkway, covered sidewalk, and as a matter of fact, because of the design, there's a potential for an outdoor arcade space if we close off part of this parking. So there could be an outdoor civic space that the village could use for all of the residents' benefit. We took into account the safety of this. These columns are not as wide in this direction, so that if somebody's walking there and they attempt to cross the street, there'd still be enough space for somebody driving a vehicle to be able to see them so that they could stop, and the person who was walking could stop, so that it would be safe. We've purposefully necked down at this location. I guess I'm getting into details probably too much, but right here we necked down the sidewalk to make it a little bit more narrow to walk through, and the reason we did that was for safety, because this is the driveway to get in and out of the garage, and this is where the cars are going to, so if you have a pedestrian-automobile conflict, that's where it's going to happen. So we purposefully made that smaller so that if somebody's walking there, you're not going to get a whole gang of people. They'll be able to, get compressed. They'll slow down their walking cadence, and then they'll be able to, this is where the entrance is for the cars. So at every opportunity, we've tried to, be smart about this design, and the committee has been also very diligent, working with the police department, the fire department, engineering, and even the building department representatives to make sure that this is a well thought out design. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Ken. As well progressed as this design is, and it is very responsive to the programmatic requirements that were put before this team by the council, this is still an ongoing dialogue. The question before us tomorrow in the referendum vote is not a vote on this design. When you read the referendum question, you will see that this design is not mentioned. The question is general. There will be further discussion of this at the council level and elsewhere as the design is modified and the design process comes to conclusion. We're not there, certainly not there yet. But let me turn it over now to Roberta Sonnenfeld, our village manager, and to her team. And hopefully we'll hear enough about finance so that it will respond to some of your questions. Then if it doesn't, you'll be able to come forward and ask questions of either group as you wish. Thank you.
Thanks, Albert. Before I turn this over to the financial experts, meaning Bob and Nancy, I just wanted to share a couple of perspectives and stuff that I've thought about over the last couple of weeks in listening to many of you. Obviously, the financial component is the critical piece of this project, a big critical piece of this project. This is one of the reasons that we hired Walker Consulting. They are the largest parking consultant and designer in the world, and they've had a lot of experience. I think they've built over, I may have this number a little wrong, but over 12,000 parking decks. So. One of the things that a couple of people have asked me is, can the garage unto itself pay for itself? And the honest answer to that question is no, it doesn't pay for itself. And it's typical in downtowns that garages unto themselves do not pay for themselves in the sense that they can cover both operating expense and debt coverage. Okay? So when Bob and Nancy take you through some of the numbers, you'll see that we basically pay for the operating expense. It's really the debt coverage. So when looking at this as a municipality, and when Walker looked at this, again, typically they look at the whole system, the whole parking system. Where are the revenues coming from? And they look at all the meters. And in that regard, when you look at the proposal that's here, this, the parking utility itself more than pays for this deck. And when they take you through the numbers that are really conservative, you'll see that not only do we cover debt and do we cover it at 1.7 or 1.8, we also wind up with surpluses every year, $300,000, $400,000 in surpluses. So there's cushion in this whole analysis. And I would put out there that it's not just municipalities that have to kind of look at the whole system, but when you think about it, none of the developers that we have that have land, I'll use Kent Smith as an example, would ever think about putting a parking deck there, because it's not a money maker at all. People ask me about the location of the garage and like, why did you put it there? And I think, I didn't realize this when we got Walker to do the analysis, but one of the Walker findings that really helped us and really confirms that this is the correct place to put this garage is that that part of town, the part of town closer to the train station, has a severe shortage in parking, really severe. As you go away from that towards Cottage Place, you start seeing more spots open up. So when folks say to me, well, maybe we should put another level at Cottage Place, honestly, we don't really need another level at Cottage Place, or even in some of the other lots that are on that side of town. So the Walker analysis did help us vis-a-vis confirming what a lot of people spoke about earlier, the dearth of parking in the downtown and the studies that we have done over the years. So the other question that has been posed is, will taxes increase because the revenues from the parking utility will no longer be used to offset property taxes in the village? The truth of the matter is the parking utility is a self-sustaining entity today. We do not normally move revenues from the parking utility to the village. Okay, and we haven't, and I confirmed actually with the treasurer just today that we have never done that. So they stay within the utility itself. I want to add a caveat to that, because I think we should be totally transparent. If the parking utility is running a deficit, which it has in the past, quarters come to mind. I don't want to be negative, but quarters come to mind. The truth of the matter is that the village had to front some money to the parking utility. Over the last 2 years, we've been paying the taxpayers back to offset those costs from several years ago. So, but in general, we do not subsidize or take monies out of the parking utility. So with that, I would also say the other thing is that the referendum says up to $15 million in a bond issue. Right now, it looks like we're at 11 and a half. I'm going to say 13. But 13 is probably a very conservative estimate. As Tim was pointing out, we've gotten some good news on the environmentals. We've got some good news on the borings and the foundations. We've gotten a lot of good news about this spot. And as a result, the number will not go up, but probably be confirmed. Okay. So anyhow, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Rooney, our CFO, for his presentation.
Thanks, Roberta. So now we talk about how we're going to pay for this and how much it's going to cost. You heard the number, 13 million, 11 million. Walker independently calculated what it's going to cost to build this facility, and they came up with $13 million. Independently, Desmond came up with their number, $13 million. So I'm pretty confident that we're in the right frame of mind here. And as we talk, we've taken a very aggressive step as to what it's going to, the components of the cost of this construction, and it keeps going in the right direction. It's moving downward. We get favorable results on the borings, we get favorable results on the footings. So these are the things that are going to move us in the right direction. So we asked Walker back in August of 2015 to do a financial feasibility study on what it's going to cost to build this facility and also to operate it on an annual basis. We ask that they project revenues, operating expenses, and debt service for the next 12 years. In addition to that, as Roberta pointed out, their study confirmed that there is a definite need for parking facilities in the village of Ridgewood, especially in the area that we've identified to put this structure. When Walker was going through the process, they identified new revenue streams, the first one being from non-resident commuter demand. We've pushed non-resident commuters out. We have the potential to bring them back in. Again, we can control how much and how many come into the facility. So that's a potential revenue stream that we can utilize. We have valet parking usage we potentially could use to fund, to assist in funding additional revenue streams into the garage. And lastly, they identified the reduction of prime off-street lots, such as Brogan and Kent Smith, where now they're being used for parking, and if they are developed, then there will be a need to push those people back into a parking garage, into a facility. In addition, Walker compared the rates that we currently charge for parking to other communities that have similar structures, have train stations, have parking garages. And the determination was that we are definitely on the low side, so there is room that we can expand the parking rates. They made several assumptions in how they felt that we could fund the structure and the operating expenses. They proposed an extension of meter hours to 8 or 9 o'clock. They proposed an increase in meter rates on key downtown streets to 75 cents, where they're currently at 50 cents. And they started that in 2016 and increased the rates in 2017, while the remainder of the surrounding areas stay at 75 cents. Throughout their whole process, they were very conservative in their assumptions. They did not anticipate revenue from return visitors. If we have a parking garage and now there's more ability to park, people will be wanting to come back here. They did not take that into consideration. The new revenue streams that they recognized were not being implemented until the last quarter of 2017. Certain expenses that they identified to run the garage, such as elevator maintenance and maintenance reserves, are significantly higher than we experience right now. So they've taken a conservative approach with that. And the revenue assumptions that they came up with were initially identified for a 350-car facility. When we identified that we wanted to bring more spaces in and go to a 412-car facility, they didn't change the revenue assumptions. So again, there's more room for revenue coming into the village. Now keep in mind that the village has the ability to change these assumptions or change the timing or the implementation of these assumptions. So we have not made a decision that this is how it's going to be and this is when it's going to happen. We are still in the process of evaluating everything that Walker has put together. Walker also identified an increase in operating expenses of 3% every year, starting in mid-2017. And they identified debt service on a $13 million construction cost of approximately $775,000 annually. The bottom line, when everything was put together, all the numbers were pointed out, all the projections were made, it is evident that the parking revenues are sufficient to fund the debt service and operating costs of the entire parking facility and the system in the village of Ridgewood. We asked the Finance Advisory Committee to take a look at Walker's report and give us some input as to whether or not they felt this thing was solid or if there's any other movement that should have been made. So with that, I'm going to ask Nancy to talk about the study or their review of this study. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. As he said, I'm a member of the Financial Advisory Committee, and Albert introduced my colleagues here who also volunteer with me to look at various financial aspects of the village. We did take a look and read the Walker report in detail, and then we also did what we'll call sensitivity analysis. So we looked at, there was a discussion of the debt coverage, and the ratios look very strong. So we did some sensitivity to say, okay, well, what if we took even more conservative assumptions than were done in the Walker study? So we played with numbers such as not including the new revenues, not extending the meter hours, using a higher, we actually used a $14 million number for the debt. And in all of those scenarios, except where you took completely conservative, right? So if you said, we're not increasing rates, we're not extending hours, we're doing 14 million at the highest possible interest rates, then yes, your debt coverage ratios are going to go down. But in all other scenarios, we still had debt coverage ratios close to 1. So we, felt that that was a pretty strong analysis, and we felt very comfortable that as a village, we'd be able to fund, and as they said, throughout using the whole parking system, we'd be able to fund a garage without having to tap into tax revenues to do it. So that being said, collectively, in looking at this and looking at the various scenarios, the Financial Advisory Committee concluded that we're strongly in support of going forward with the project. And the other thing I would note, there's clearly been a lot of discussion around the village about whether the garage is too big and whether we need to have the level and the design. And obviously we're not, it's been said multiple times, we're not voting on the design. The thing that makes me feel personally comfortable is that when we did all of our analysis, we never really took into consideration the new revenues for a 412 space garage. We were always looking at either the existing parking spaces or a smaller number of space, or the 350. So even if we turn around and we say, okay, you know what, we're going to cut a level or two off of the garage, we feel comfortable that the finances support it. Anything anybody would add? No? Okay. And we're happy to share if anyone likes numbers.
So what you have seen this evening are the architectural renderings and the design considerations as they exist to date. I know that Roberta and her team are talking about some design modifications that might possibly lower the height of the building and the impact that might have on capacity and cost. The numbers have various sensitivity analyses built into them so that you can alter assumptions and see what impact that has on the debt coverage ability. So this is still very much a process. However, we do have a vote tomorrow, and that vote tomorrow is on the concept, the question, should we or should we not build a garage in this town for up to $15 million? So hopefully many, many people will come out and vote tomorrow. It clearly is an important question, one that, as you can see, has been before us at least since 1968, and I think everybody knows the question predates 1968, also by several decades, remarkable as that may seem. So at this point, the floor is open to you to come forward, because I know some of you may have questions on the finance, and others may have questions on the design, and some of you may have questions on both. So I'm going to try the format as we did last week, seemed to work well. Just come forward and talk to the design professionals, the financial experts. I invite members of the Historic Preservation Commission that are here, and I think, Tess, you're the only member from the Historic Preservation Commission, but please feel free to join the architects in their review of the design, and members of the Financial Advisory Committee likewise in the discussion of the finances. So at this point, over to you. Please come forward as you wish and ask whatever questions you have. Thank you.
If it gets voted no,